The morning sun rose over New Seoul like it did every day for the past 20 years. Kim Tae-ho opened his small supply store at exactly 7 in the morning, just like his father taught him to do. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of mining trucks starting their engines outside his window. This was home. This was peace. This was everything humanity had dreamed of when they first reached for the stars. Jin-woo, his 18-year-old son, was already awake, reading about the space academy on his tablet. His eyes sparkled with the same dreams that had brought humans to this distant world. He wanted to fly between the stars and build bridges between different worlds. His father smiled, watching him. Jin-woo reminded him of himself, at that age full of hope and big dreams. The colony of New Seoul stretched across 3 continents of this beautiful planet. 40 million people called it home. Most were young men who came here to work in the massive mining operations that dug precious metals from deep underground. These metals powered the ships that carried humans to new worlds and built the cities where families could live safely, Lee. Hyun-sik put on his mining gear at 5 in the morning like he did every day for the past 10 years. His wife So-young was still back on Earth taking care of his elderly parents, but he sent most of his money back to them every month. The work was hard, but the pay was good, and he knew that someday he would save enough to bring his family here to live with him. The mines went deep into the planet, sometimes 5 miles down into the rock. The tunnels were lit by bright lights and kept safe by the best technology humans could build. Workers like Hyun-sik operated huge machines that could dig through solid stone and extract the valuable metals that made space travel possible. It was dangerous work, but every man who did it knew he was helping build humanity's future park. Min-ho taught the children of the colony at the Central School. He loved watching their faces light up when he told them stories about Earth and the other human worlds scattered across space. These children were the first generation born among the stars, and they carried themselves with a confidence that amazed him. They truly believed the galaxy was their home, and that all the different alien species were their friends. The Galactic Council had ruled this part of space for over 5,000 years. They were made up of 12 ancient alien races who had learned to work together and keep peace between the stars. Humans were the newest members accepted into the council only 50 years ago, after proving they were civilized and peaceful. The council had strict rules about how new members could expand and grow. Human colonies like New Seoul had to report everything they did to the council inspectors, who visited regularly. The humans never minded this, because they understood that rules helped keep peace between so many different species. The peacekeepers were the council's military force. They flew in massive ships that could destroy entire planets if needed, but mostly they just patrolled trade routes and settled disputes between worlds. The sight of a peacekeeper ship was supposed to make everyone feel safe because it meant the council was watching over them. On this particular morning, the children ran to school laughing and playing games they had learned from kids on other worlds. The miners prepared for another day of hard but honest work. The shop owners like Tae-ho got ready to serve their customers and help their community thrive. Everything felt normal and safe. What nobody knew was that far above them in the cold darkness of space, a fleet of peacekeeper ships was approaching New Seoul. This was not a routine patrol or inspection. This was something much more dangerous. The council had made a decision about humanity, and that decision was about to change everything. The council meeting had happened. 3 months earlier, on their ancient capital world, the 12 elder races had gathered to discuss what they called the human problem. Humans were growing too fast and spreading too quickly across the galaxy. Some of the elders worried that in another 100 years humans might become powerful enough to challenge the council's authority. They looked at planets like New Seoul and saw not peaceful mining colonies, but potential military bases. They saw not families building new lives, but armies preparing for future wars. They convinced themselves that humans were naturally violent and would eventually try to conquer the galaxy. The solution they chose was brutal, but they convinced themselves it was necessary. They would eliminate the largest concentration of human males and send a message that would keep humanity in its place forever. New Sol, with its 40 million, mostly young male population, was the perfect target A's. Evening came to New Sol. The families gathered for dinner like they always did. Children told their parents about what they learned in school. Workers like Hyun-sik called their families on Earth to say goodnight. Shop owners like Tai-ho counted the day's earnings and planned for tomorrow. Jin-woo read more about the Space Academy and dreamed of the adventures waiting for him. The communication center received the last normal transmission from Earth. It was just routine news about trade shipments and family messages. Nothing suggested that anything was about to change. The night shift operators settled in for what they expected to be another quiet evening. High above them, the Peacekeeper fleet moved into position around the planet. Their ships were so advanced that the colony's sensors could not detect them until it was too late. The fleet commander looked down at the sleeping world and felt no emotion. This was just another day at work for him. Another problem to solve. The colonists slept peacefully in their beds, never imagining that their trusted protectors had become their executioners. They dreamed of tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the tomorrows they thought they would have. They dreamed of Jin-woo getting into the Space Academy and Hyun-sik bringing his wife to New Sol and Min-ho watching his students grow up to become leaders of the new generation. In a few hours, those dreams would all be burning. The peaceful morning that was coming would bring fire from the sky and death from those they trusted. The 40 million people sleeping safely in their beds would wake up to the last day of their lives, and most of them would not live to see the sunset. But for now, in these final hours of peace, New Sol slept quietly under the stars. The mining equipment sat silent until the next shift. The schools were empty until the children would come running through the doors again. The shops were closed until their owners would open them for another day of serving their community. It was the calm before the storm that would shake the entire galaxy. The first beam of death came down at exactly 6 in the morning, just as the sun was rising over the eastern mountains. It struck the main mining facility and turned 3 square miles of metal and stone into molten glass in less than 10 seconds. The explosion was so bright that people 50 miles away saw the flash through their bedroom windows. Jin-woo was brushing his teeth when the ground shook so hard that he fell to his knees. The bathroom mirror cracked and fell in pieces around him. He heard his father Tai-ho shouting from downstairs, but he could not understand the words because his ears were ringing from the blast. Jin-woo ran to his window and saw a pillar of fire reaching up to the sky where the mines used to be. More beams fell from the dark ships that appeared like ghosts against the morning stars. The residential areas exploded in chains of fire that raced from building to building. Families ran screaming through the streets carrying children and old people, but there was nowhere safe to run. The attacks came from every direction at once. Tai-ho grabbed his son and pulled him toward the back door of their shop, but the roof collapsed before they could reach it. A burning beam pinned Jin-woo's leg to the floor, and his father fought desperately to lift it. The young man looked up at his father with eyes full of fear and confusion. Why was this happening? Who was attacking them down in mine shaft? 7. Lee Hyun-sik felt the mountain shake around him. The lights went out and rocks began falling from the ceiling. He and 40 other miners ran toward the emergency elevator, but it was not working anymore. They were trapped 5 miles underground, while the world above them burned. The tunnels that had been their workplace for years became their tomb at the Central School Park. Min-ho was preparing his lessons for the day when the windows exploded inward. The blast threw him across the room, and when he got up, he saw fires burning in every direction. Children would be coming to school soon, and he had to protect them. He ran outside to warn families to keep their kids home, but the streets were full of smoke and falling debris. The peacekeeper ships hung in the sky like metal vultures, their weapons fired continuously, turning the mining cities into craters and the farms into burning fields. The aliens inside those ships followed their orders with cold efficiency. They had scanners that could tell the difference between men and women, between adults and children. Their targeting was very precise. The attack was not random destruction, it was systematic murder. Every male between 15 and 45 years old was marked for death. The alien computers calculated where these targets would be and directed the weapons accordingly. They hit the mines first because that was where most of the young men worked. Then they hit the schools and residential areas where families lived, in the underground shelters that were built for mining accidents. Hundreds of people huddled together, hoping the thick concrete would protect them. But the peacekeeper weapons could punch through solid rock. These shelters became ovens, as the heat from above made the air inside burning hot. People tried to dig deeper, but the ground itself was on fire. Communications officer Park Sung-min managed to get one desperate message out to Earth before his transmission tower collapsed. The message was short and full of static, but it carried the most important news in human history. "We are under attack by Council forces. They are killing everyone. Send help." The message traveled through space at light speed, but help was years away. Young mothers like Kim So-ra grabbed their babies and ran toward the spaceport, hoping to find a ship that could take them away from this nightmare. But the spaceport was one of the first targets hit. Its runways were melted metal, and its control tower was gone. The few ships that tried to take off were shot down before they cleared the atmosphere. The killing went on for 6 hours without stopping. The peacekeepers methodically destroyed every building, every vehicle, every piece of technology that could be used for communication or escape. They were not just destroying the colony, they were erasing it from existence. Their goal was to make sure no one could tell the rest of humanity what really happened here. By noon, the attack stopped, not because the aliens felt mercy, but because there were no more targets worth. Hitting New Seoul was dead. The great mining cities that had provided metals for human expansion were smoking craters. The farms that fed 3 continents were ash. The spaceport that connected this world to the rest of human civilization was twisted. 40 million people had lived on New Seoul that morning. By noon, most of them were dead. The aliens had kept careful count. Their scanners showed that 98% of males in the target age range had been eliminated. Mission accomplished. The few survivors crawled out of collapsed buildings and tried to understand what had happened to their world. Old women searched through rubble looking for their sons. Young children cried for parents who would never answer their calls again. The lucky ones who lived were mostly women, children, and elderly people who the council considered harmless. Admiral Zektar of the Peacekeepers recorded his final report from the command deck of his flagship below him. The planet that had been New Seoul was now just a burning rock with scattered patches of life. The human experiment in rapid expansion had been corrected. The message had been sent. His report to the council was brief and professional. Target neutralized 40 million enemy combatants. Eliminated galactic security, restored human expansion capabilities, reduced by estimated 60% colony infrastructure, destroyed, surviving population pose no threat. Returning to base, but Admiral Zektar made a mistake that would cost his people everything. He assumed that the few survivors would be too traumatized and scattered to tell anyone what really happened. He thought that Earth would believe some story about an industrial accident or natural disaster. He did not understand that humans had a way of remembering their dead. In the ruins of the Communications Center Park, Sung-min was dying from burns and radiation poisoning, but he used the last of his strength to repair an emergency transmitter. With shaking hands, he sent out a final message that would reach Earth in 3 days. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. They killed us all. The council did this. Remember us. The message was picked up by a trading ship 2 days later and relayed to Earth the captain, who received it thought it might be some kind of joke or mistake. Surely the peaceful Galactic Council would never do something like this. But when he tried to contact New Sol, there was only silence. The colony that had been home to 40 million. Humans was no longer answering its calls. On New Sol, the sun set over a dead world. The mines were gone, the cities were gone. The dreams and hopes of 40 million people had been turned to ash in a single day. The survivors who remained faced a choice: they could try to rebuild their broken lives, or they could make sure the galaxy remembered what happened here. Most chose to remember. They gathered the names of the dead and recorded them in makeshift memorials. They collected evidence of what the peacekeepers had done. They prepared testimony that would reach Earth and tell humanity the truth about their trusted protectors. The Council thought they had ended the human threat, but they had actually created something much more dangerous. They had created witnesses, and witnesses have a way of making the truth known across space and time. The message reached Earth on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. Sol-Time Communications Officer Lee Min-jung was drinking her coffee when the emergency transmission came through the deep space relay. The signal was weak and full of static, but the words were clear enough. They killed us all. The Council did this. 40 million dead. Remember us. Min-jung dropped her coffee cup and ran to her supervisor. She had been monitoring space communications for 12 years and had never heard anything like this. The supervisor listened to the message 3 times before hitting the emergency alert button. Within minutes, the message was being analyzed by the highest levels of Earth government. President Cho Min-soo was in a meeting about trade agreements. When his security chief burst through the doors, the man's face was white with shock, and he could barely speak. "Mr. President, we have a situation on New Sol. The colony is not responding to calls. We received a distress message claiming 40 million casualties." The president felt his blood turn cold. New Sol was home to his nephews and thousands of families he had met during campaign visits. 40 million casualties was impossible. It had to be some kind of mistake or equipment failure, he ordered. Immediate contact attempts with the colony, but every call went unanswered. The silence from New Sol was deafening. Within 6 hours, refugee ships began arriving at Earth. They carried the few thousand survivors who had managed to escape New Sol. Before the communication systems were destroyed, these people brought with them stories that made seasoned military officers weep. Grown men who had seen war could not listen to the testimonies without breaking down. Kim Sora held her baby daughter. Close as she told her story to the emergency committee, her husband had been working in Mine Shaft 12 when the attacks began. She never saw him again. The blast had thrown her and the baby into a drainage ditch where they hid for hours listening to the sounds of death above them. The survivors all told the same story. Peacekeeper ships had appeared without warning and systematically destroyed everything. The weapons had targeted men between 15 and 45 with deadly precision. This was not an accident or a natural disaster. This was planned. Genocide carried out by the species humanity had trusted most. News of the massacre spread across Earth like wildfire. Within hours, millions of people gathered in the streets of Seoul demanding answers. The government buildings were surrounded by crowds holding pictures of sons and brothers who had been living on New Sol. The crying and shouting could be heard for miles. Similar scenes played out across human space. On Mars, the mining. Colonies shut down as workers refused to continue their shifts. The space stations observed moments of silence that lasted for days. Military bases that had been quiet for decades suddenly buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for something that had never happened before. Commander Yang Jae-sung received the emergency orders at his base on Europa. His own son, Dong-hyun, had been working as an engineer on New Sol, helping to design the new mining systems. Yang had spoken to his son just 2 days before the attack. They had talked about Dong-hyun's plans to come home for his mother's birthday next month. Now Yang stared at the orders that would make him the leader of humanity's military response. His hands shook as he read the casualty. Reports 40 million dead in 6 hours. The largest single loss of human life in history, carried out by the aliens they had called friends and protectors. Dr. Lee So-jin worked frantically in the secret weapons laboratories buried deep under the mountains of Korea. She had been developing theoretical weapon systems for years just in case humanity ever needed to defend itself. Now those theories had to become reality, and they had to work perfectly the first time. Her team worked around the clock designing new types of energy weapons that could penetrate Council ship shields. They developed kinetic projectiles that could move at incredible speeds, and cyber weapons that could disable entire fleets. But most importantly, they created the Soul Protocol weapons that could target alien biology while leaving human areas untouched. The refugee testimonies were broadcast across human civilization. People watched in horror as survivors described the casual cruelty of the peacekeepers. Children asked their parents why the aliens they had been taught to respect had killed their cousins and friends. Parents struggled to explain something that had no explanation. Religious leaders across human space held emergency meetings. They had preached peace and cooperation with alien species for 50 years. Now they faced crowds demanding to know how a just universe could allow such evil. Some continued to preach forgiveness, but their voices were drowned out by the rising tide of anger. The economic impact was immediate. Trade with Council species stopped completely. Human businesses refused to sell anything to aliens, and alien goods were boycotted across human worlds. The stock markets crashed as investors realized that humanity was about to go to war with the entire galaxy. President Cho Min-soo called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Representatives from every human world traveled to Earth to decide how humanity would respond. The assembly hall had never been so full or so quiet. Everyone understood that the next few days would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars. Intelligence reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Council fleets were moving into position around human space. The aliens apparently expected some kind of response, but they seemed confident that their superior numbers and technology would crush any resistance quickly. They had forgotten what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. On the 4th day after the massacre, construction began on the largest fleet in human history. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels and passenger ships switched to military production. Civilian factories retooled to produce weapons and armor mining. Operations that had supplied peaceful expansion now fed the war machine. Young people lined up at recruiting stations faster than the military could process them. College students abandoned their studies to learn how to fight. Grandparents who had lived through Earth's last wars came out of retirement to teach the new generation how to survive in combat. The mood across human space was unlike anything in history. This was not the excitement of adventure or the fear of uncertainty. This was cold, focused rage directed at a specific target. Every human who had lost someone on New Sol carried that person's memory like a flame that would never go out. The Council sent diplomatic messages offering to negotiate. They claimed the attack on New Sol had been a mistake carried out by rogue commanders. They promised investigations and reparations if humanity would return to peaceful cooperation. But these messages went unanswered. Humanity was no longer interested in talking. The time for words had ended when 40 million innocents died in a single morning. Now there would be only action and the consequences that followed. The Council had taught humanity a lesson about power, and humanity was about to teach them a lesson about consequences. As the 4th day ended, President Cho Min-soo prepared for the speech that would change galactic history. He had spent hours writing and rewriting the words that would declare humanity's intentions. The speech would be broadcast to every human world and every alien species in the galaxy. Tomorrow, humanity would speak with one voice, and that voice would carry a message the Council would never forget. The massacre of New Sol had been meant to keep humanity in its place. Instead, it had freed humanity from any obligation to show mercy to those who showed none to them. The dead of New Seoul would be remembered, and they would be avenged. The 5th day after the New Seoul massacre dawned clear and cold across Earth, President Cho Min-soo stood before his bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning, looking at a man who had aged 10 years in 5 days. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and new lines marked his face, but his eyes burned with a fire that had not been there before. He had spent the entire night writing the speech that would change everything. The words had to be perfect because they would be remembered for as long. As humanity existed among the stars, these words would either rally his people to victory or condemn them all to extinction. There was no middle ground left. The United Earth Assembly Hall filled slowly as representatives from hundreds of human worlds took their seats. Each person carried the weight of their dead. Every colony, every space station, every mining outpost had lost someone on New Seoul. The silence in the Great Hall was heavier than the vacuum of space at exactly noon Earth time. President Cho walked onto the stage. The flags of every human world hung behind him, all draped in black for the 40 million dead. The assembly rose as one and remained standing in honor of those who would never stand again. The president waited for them to sit before he began to speak. "My fellow humans," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the hall and across space to every human settlement in the galaxy. "We came to the stars in peace. We joined the Galactic Council with hope in our hearts and trust in our souls. We believed that civilization meant protecting the innocent and showing mercy to the weak. We were wrong." The cameras broadcast his words to billions of humans watching on screens across hundreds of worlds. Children stopped, playing to listen. Miners put down their tools. Soldiers stood at attention. Everyone understood that history was being made in this moment. "The Council has shown us what they truly think of humanity," the president continued. "We are not partners to them. We are not even enemies worthy of respect. We are insects to be stepped on when we become inconvenient. They killed 40 million of our sons and brothers, not in battle, not in defense, but as a casual demonstration of power." His voice grew stronger with each word, and the anger that had been building in human hearts for 5 days found its focus. The president was not just speaking for Earth. He was speaking for every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of a better future. They murdered our children while they slept. They burned our cities while families ate breakfast. They destroyed our dreams while we trusted them to protect us. 40 million human beings died in 6 hours, and the Council calls this a necessary action to maintain galactic peace. The assembly was completely silent, but across human space, millions of people shouted their agreement. The rage that had been simmering since the first news reports now boiled over into something much more dangerous. It was becoming determination. "Therefore," he said, raising his voice so that every human in the galaxy could hear, by the authority granted to me by every human world, "I hereby declare that a state of extinction war exists between humanity and the Galactic Council." The words hit like thunder. Every person in the assembly hall felt them in their bones. This was not a declaration of limited conflict or political disagreement. This was a promise of total war, fought until one side or the other ceased to exist. "This is not a war for territory or resources," the president continued. "This is not a war for political advantage. This is a war for the right to exist. We will fight until the Council is destroyed or until the last human draws breath. There will be no negotiation. There will be no compromise. There will be no peace until justice is done." The assembly erupted in applause that went on for 10 minutes. Representatives wept openly as they clapped. Some shouted the names of the dead, others simply stood and let their tears fall. The emotion was so powerful that even the hardened security guards had to wipe their eyes. Across human space, the reaction was immediate. Crowds gathered in every major city cheering and crying and promising to do whatever it took to win this war. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed by volunteers. Factory workers volunteered for extra shifts to build weapons. Scientists offered their knowledge to develop new technologies. The declaration was broadcast to alien species across the galaxy within hours. Most dismissed it as the emotional outburst of a grieving species. The Council itself issued a statement calling humanity irrational and promising to restore order quickly. They could not believe that one young species would dare challenge the combined might of thousands of worlds. What they failed to understand was that humanity was no longer thinking rationally. The massacre of New Sol had pushed humans beyond the point where logic and self-preservation mattered. More than rational thought, this was about justice. More than survival, this was about making the Council pay for every innocent life they had taken. Commander Yang Jae-sung watched the declaration from his command center on Europa. His staff had been working for days to prepare for this moment. Now that war was officially declared, they could begin implementing plans that had been developed in secret for decades. Humanity had not been as defenseless as the Council believed. The first orders went out immediately. Every human ship in space was recalled to defensive positions. Mining operations were converted to military production. Civilian populations on vulnerable worlds began evacuating to more secure locations. The war machine that had been building for 5 days shifted into high gear. Dr. Lee. Sojin received authorization to begin mass production of her experimental weapons. The Sol Protocol was no longer theoretical. It was humanity's secret weapon against species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Her laboratories began producing devices that could level the playing field between humans and aliens on Mars. The great factories began producing warships instead of cargo haulers. The asteroid belt mining, operations focused on metals needed for weapons and armor. The space elevators carried military supplies instead of trade goods. Everything that had made human expansion possible now served the war effort. Religious leaders across human space struggled. With the declaration, many had preached peace and forgiveness, but 40 million dead children made those concepts difficult to embrace. Some called for restraint, but they were vastly outnumbered by those who saw this as a holy war against evil. The economic implications were staggering. Humanity was about to fight a war against species that controlled most galactic trade routes. Human worlds would have to become completely self-sufficient or face starvation. The risks were enormous, but no one cared about economics when their children had been murdered. Intelligence reports showed Council fleets massing near human space. The aliens were taking the declaration more seriously than their public statements suggested. They were preparing for a quick, decisive campaign to crush human resistance and restore their authority. What the Council did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this possibility since joining their organization. Humans had always been suspicious of authority and had quietly developed contingency plans for the day their trust might be betrayed. That day had finally come as night fell across Earth. President Cho Min-soo stood in his office, looking out at the lights of Seoul. The city buzzed with activity. As millions of people prepared for war, he thought about the 40 million who had died on New Seoul and made a promise to their memory. This war would not end until every person responsible for their deaths faced justice. The Council had started this conflict by murdering innocents. Now humanity would finish it by any means necessary. The declaration of Extinction War was not just words. It was a sacred oath that would be kept no matter the cost. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 6 months after the declaration of Extinction War, the galaxy began to understand that humanity had not been making empty threats. The peaceful species that had joined the Galactic Council in good faith had vanished, replaced by something the Council had never encountered before, a war machine built from grief and powered by the memory of 40 million dead Commander Yang Jae-sung, stood on the bridge of the flagship Seoul Vengeance as it led the largest fleet in human history toward its first target, his son. Dong-hyun would have been 25 today. Instead, he was ash floating in the ruins of New Seoul. Yang carried his son's picture in his uniform pocket and touched it before every battle. The human fleet numbered 50,000 ships, built in factories that worked around the clock for months. Each vessel was designed specifically for war against the Council species. No expense had been spared. No technology overlooked. These ships carried weapons that could punch through any known defense and shields that could withstand massive punishment. Captain Park Sung-ho commanded the destroyer New Seoul's Fury. His entire family had died in the massacre, and he flew their names painted on his ship's hull. Every shot he fired, every enemy ship he destroyed was dedicated to their memory. He had volunteered for the most dangerous missions because death held no fear for someone who had already lost everything. The first target was a Council patrol fleet investigating what their reports called minor disturbances in human space. The alien commanders expected to find some refugee ships or perhaps a few improvised weapons. They found instead a coordinated ambush by ships they had never seen before, using technology they did not recognize. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Council ships were designed for intimidation and policing actions against civilian populations. They were not prepared to fight an enemy that attacked with surgical precision and overwhelming firepower. Every alien vessel was destroyed before they could send a distress call. Major Kim Yeon-woo led the boarding parties that searched the wreckage for survivors and intelligence. Her teams found evidence that the Council had been planning similar attacks on other human colonies. New Seoul had not been an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a campaign to reduce human population growth across the galaxy. The human fleet broadcast a message on all frequencies. This is for New Seoul. This is only the beginning. Every species that participated in the murder of our people will face justice. There will be no mercy for those who showed none to our children. Remember this moment because it is the last time you will underestimate. Humanity news of the victory spread through human space like wildfire. People celebrated in the streets, but their leaders remained focused. This had been just a patrol fleet. The real test would come when they faced the main Council battle groups that were already moving to intercept them. Dr. Lee So-jin watched the battle reports from her laboratory deep under the Korean mountains. Her weapons had performed perfectly. The Seoul Protocol had targeted alien nervous systems while leaving human technology undamaged. Her cyber weapons had disabled Council ship computers in seconds. Her kinetic projectiles had punched through alien armor like paper, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Council would adapt to human tactics and technology. The war would become harder as it continued. She worked 18 hours a day developing new weapon systems that could stay ahead of alien countermeasures. Her laboratory had become the most important place in human space. The Council's response was swift and overwhelming. They dispatched battle fleets from across the galaxy to crush what they still believed was a minor rebellion. Their ships numbered in the hundreds of thousands, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the human fleet. The aliens were confident that their superior technology and numbers would end this quickly. Admiral Zektar, the alien who had commanded the New Seoul massacre, led the largest Council fleet in galactic history. He was looking forward to finishing what he had started. The humans would be completely destroyed this time, with no survivors to carry tales of resistance to other young species. The fleets met in the empty space between star systems, where no civilian populations could be harmed. The battle that followed would be remembered as the largest space combat in galactic history. Over 700,000 ships fought in a conflict that raged for 3 days. The Council ships attacked in massive formations designed to overwhelm human defenses through sheer firepower. But the humans had learned from studying alien tactics for 50 years. They knew how the Council fought and had designed their entire strategy around countering those methods. Human ships were smaller and faster than Council vessels. They struck hard at specific targets and disappeared before retaliation could come. The aliens found themselves fighting shadows that appeared without warning, delivered devastating attacks, and vanished back into space. Captain Park Sung-ho's destroyer was hit by alien fire that would have vaporized any human ship built before the war. But the new armor held and his weapon systems remained online. He led his squadron in a diving attack that destroyed 3 Council cruisers. Before they could react, his crew fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. The Sol Protocol proved to be even more effective against large fleets. Dr. Sojin's weapons could target multiple alien species, simultaneously disrupting their nervous systems and causing system failures across entire battle groups. Ships that had fought together for centuries suddenly found themselves unable to coordinate their attacks. On the second day of battle, the tide began to turn Council. Commanders who had expected easy victory found their fleets being systematically destroyed by an enemy they had underestimated. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and desperate courage that the aliens could not match. Major Kim Yeon-woo led her boarding parties onto disabled Council ships, capturing alien commanders and gathering intelligence about planned attacks on human worlds. The information they gathered revealed that the Council had been planning to eliminate humanity completely, not just reduce their numbers. By the third day, the Council fleet was in full retreat. Admiral Zektar's flagship was surrounded by human ships, and he faced the choice between surrender and death. He chose to fight to the end, but his ship was overwhelmed by concentrated fire from dozens of human vessels. The alien who had ordered the New Sol massacre died in the explosion of his own command center. The victory was complete but costly. Humanity had lost 15,000 ships and over 2 million lives, but they had destroyed the largest Council fleet in history and proven that the Galactic Order could be challenged. The survivors broadcast another message to the galaxy. This is what happens to those who murder our children. Your fleets are not invincible. Your technology is not supreme. Your authority is not absolute. We are coming for every species that participated in the New Sol massacre, and we will not stop until justice is done across the galaxy. Alien species that had served the Council for millennia began to reconsider their loyalty. Some had participated in the massacre reluctantly, others had cheered when humanity was put in its place. Now they all faced a choice: stand with the Council and face human vengeance, or surrender and hope for mercy. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven that the impossible was possible. A single species could challenge the combined might of the galaxy if they were willing to pay the price. The memory of 40 million dead had been forged into weapons that could shatter the oldest empire in known space. Commander Yang looked out at the wreckage of the Council fleet floating in space. He thought of his son Dong-hyun and all the other young people who had died on New Sol. They would never see this victory, but their sacrifice had made it possible. Humanity had learned to turn grief into strength and loss into weapons. The next phase of the war would begin soon. Other Council fleets were already moving to intercept the humans, but Yang was no longer worried about superior numbers or ancient technology. Humanity had found something more powerful than either the will to make their enemies pay for every innocent life that had been taken. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were truly capable of when pushed beyond all limits. 2 years after the declaration of Extinction War, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. The ancient order that had ruled for 5,000 years lay in ruins. Species that had never questioned Council authority now flew human flags over their capital, cities. The war that was supposed to last weeks had reshaped civilized space fleet. Admiral Yang Jae-sung now wore the stars of Supreme Command as he prepared for the final assault on the Council capital world. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines marked his face, but his eyes still burned with the fire that had driven him since his son Dong-hyun died on New Sol. Every battle fought, every enemy defeated had led to this moment. The human fleet that surrounded the ancient capital was beyond massive. 1 million ships from every human world and colony had gathered for this final confrontation. Ships built in the factories of Earth flew alongside vessels constructed in the asteroid belts of the outer colonies. The entire industrial might of humanity had been focused on this single goal. Captain Park Sung-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, New Seoul Remembers, as the attack began. He had survived every major battle of the war, and his ship bore the scars of dozens of engagements. The names of his dead family were still painted on the hull, faded now, but still visible reminders of why this war had to be won. The Council capital world had never been attacked in its entire history. It was defended by orbital fortresses that could destroy entire fleets and energy shields that had never been penetrated. The alien defenders were confident that even if humanity won every other battle, they would break themselves against these ancient defenses. They were wrong. Dr. Lee So-jin had spent 2 years developing weapons specifically designed to crack the capital's defenses. Her new quantum disruptors could phase through energy shields, and her plasma cannons could melt the strongest armor. The Seoul Protocol had been refined to target the specific biology of every Council species. The attack began at dawn with waves of human ships striking the outer defenses. The orbital fortresses that had protected the capital for millennia were overwhelmed. In the first hour, their massive weapons designed to destroy conventional fleets could not track the fast-moving human vessels that darted between their firing arcs. Major Kim Yeon-woo led the first landing forces onto the capital's surface. Her Marines had fought on 100 worlds and learned to adapt to any environment. The alien defenders fought desperately, but they were facing soldiers who had been forged in the fires of total war. Every human warrior carried the memory of New Seoul as their shield. The battle for the capital raged for 3 days as human forces methodically destroyed every military installation and government building. The aliens who had ordered the massacre of 40 million innocents found themselves hunted through the streets of their own city. There was nowhere to hide from the justice that had finally come. On the 3rd day, Admiral Yang himself led the assault on the council chamber, where the 12 elder races had made their fateful decision to destroy New Seoul. The ancient building had stood for thousands of years as a symbol of galactic order. Now it burned under human weapons as the old order died. One by one, the council species surrendered. They broadcast messages of regret and pleas for mercy, claiming they had been forced to participate in the massacre. Some had genuinely opposed the decision, but fear had kept them silent. Others had enthusiastically supported the plan to reduce human numbers. Now they all faced the consequences. The human response was always the same. Did our boys on New Seoul get mercy? Did our families get a chance to surrender? Your surrender is accepted, but you will face trial for war crimes. There would be justice, not revenge, but every species that had participated would answer for their actions. The final battle took place in the council chamber itself, where the surviving alien leaders had barricaded themselves. Yang led the assault personally, thinking of his son and all the other young people whose lives had been stolen by these creatures. The fighting was fierce, but brief. The age of council rule was ending. When the smoke cleared, Yang stood in the chamber where humanity had once begged for acceptance as junior members of galactic civilization. Now, the roles were reversed. The species that had ruled the stars for millennia knelt before human judges, waiting to learn their fate. Some humans called for revenge for doing to council worlds what had been done to New Seoul. The anger was understandable after years of war and millions of human casualties. But President Cho Min-soo, now aged and worn by the burden of leadership, made a different choice. We fought this war not to become monsters, but to ensure that monsters can never again destroy the innocent, He declared in a speech broadcast across the galaxy, "The Council is finished, but we will not repeat their crimes. We will build something better." The trials that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Every species that had participated in the New Sol massacre was forced to confront their actions. Witnesses testified about the systematic murder of 40 million innocents. Evidence was presented showing the cold calculation behind the decision. Some alien leaders showed genuine remorse and were given the chance to rebuild their civilizations under human oversight. Others who had enthusiastically supported the massacre faced harsher justice. Their species would be restricted and monitored to ensure they could never again threaten innocent life. The galaxy slowly began to heal under human leadership. New alliances formed based on mutual respect rather than fear. Species that had been oppressed by the Council were given the chance to govern themselves. Trade resumed, but now flowed through human-controlled routes that prioritized fairness over profit. The survivors of New Sol, now older and marked by loss, helped design memorials that ensured the 40 million dead would never be forgotten. Their names were carved into monuments on every human world. Their story became required learning in schools across the galaxy. Their sacrifice had become the foundation for a more just civilization. Dr. Lee Sojin converted her weapons laboratories into research. Centers focused on peaceful technology. The Sol protocol that had been designed to kill aliens was modified to cure diseases and extend life. The same brilliant minds that had won the war now worked to heal the galaxy. Years passed, and the galaxy adapted to human rule. Some species prospered under the new order, while others struggled to accept their reduced status, but none dared to challenge human authority. The memory of what had happened to the Council served as a permanent reminder of the consequences of harming innocents on the 10th anniversary of the New Sol massacre. Yang visited the memorial built on the site of the former colony. He was an old man now, his hair white and his hands shaking, but he still wore his uniform with pride. The memorial listed every name of every person who had died that terrible day. As he read the names, Yang thought about the price of justice. His son, Dong Hyun, was listed among the dead, along with Jin Woo, the shopkeeper's son, and Hyun Sik, the miner, and millions of others whose only crime had been existing at the wrong time and place, but their deaths had not been meaningless. The galaxy was safer now, ruled by a species that remembered what it meant to lose everything children played. Safely on worlds that had once lived in fear of Council oppression, trade flowed freely between species that had been kept apart by ancient prejudices. The story ended where it began, with an old man telling children about the past. Jin Woo had somehow survived the massacre hidden in the rubble of his father's shop. He was now a grandfather himself, teaching his grandchildren about the time when humanity stood up to gods and won. Remember, he told them, as he had told countless others over the years, we did not fight for conquest or glory. We fought because 40 million boys deserved to live, and someone had to make sure their deaths meant something. We fought so that no one would ever again murder children and call it peace. The children listened, with wide eyes, learning the lesson that would guide humanity for generations to come. Never again would anyone destroy human lives with impunity. The galaxy had learned that when you kill humanities, children, you do not get to live with the consequences. You get to die with them. And in the silence that followed his words, the memory of 40 million boys continued to protect the innocent across the stars, their sacrifice eternal, their justice complete, their legacy written in the laws that would govern the galaxy forever.